Eagles Entertainment.
The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA Roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy, and we've got some SEC action here this weekend with college football kicking into another gear. Cannot wait to dig into some of these games this weekend, and we will do just that at the top of the show here on Saturday Scouting. Ben Fennell and I are going to go through some matchups to watch. We're going to talk about traits that matter to us as well at the offensive tackle position in our Under the Hood segment. After that, Mr. Relevant this week is going to be Austin Ward, who covers Ohio State football for the Letterman. We're going to talk all about Justin Fields, the Buckeyes football team, as they get ready for their return to play, which is going to be great to see with the college football season really kind of, again, kicking into another gear. You know, we got Big Ten football coming up here in just a few weeks, so we'll talk all about Ohio State there with Austin Ward. After that, we'll wrap the show up with Pick 6. Ross Tucker back in the fold. We're going to keep score for another round of competition here this week. We'll see how Ross and I fared last week. We'll preview some of the games to watch here this weekend. Before we get into the start of the show, just a reminder, just go on to Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, leave us a comment. If you've got a question or a mock draft, leave it on there. We will answer it right on next week's show. Next Monday, when we record, I will make sure we get it into the show. So if you like what you hear, if you're enjoying these podcasts, the best way to throw us your support is to go on to Apple Podcasts, leave us that rating, leave us that comment. All right, let's get into it now. It's time for Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
Well, back for another edition of Saturday Scouting, our friend Ben Fennell. Ben, let's jump right in, man. Draft buzz. I guess some of the big newsworthy bites going into this weekend, unfortunately, just a few games, another handful of games that are postponed due to concerns with COVID-19. We got North Texas versus Houston. Houston, dude, they've had like 5 or 6 games already postponed because of COVID-19. South Florida, they are not playing against FAU this weekend because they played against Notre Dame last week. Notre Dame has had a few positive cases, and so their game against Wake Forest, which was going to be one of the highlight matchups of the weekend, that game has been postponed. They're hoping, I think, to play that game next week. So a couple matchups taken off our plate here, but that being said, we do have some good matchups. And Ben, I will go to you first. Let's pick a couple of one-on-one matchups that we are excited this weekend, or are excited about this weekend with some, an eye towards the NFL draft. What's the first one you want to kind of profile here?
Well, we're sticking all SEC all the time. It's the return of SEC play in September, nonetheless, and we're getting a lot of conference matchups, which is really fun. So we're going to kick things off. Let's go Alabama against Missouri. I want to see Dylan Moses' return at linebacker coming off the ACL and seeing how he matches up against this really unique combo 1-2 punch at Missouri. Larry Roundtree and Tyler Beatty, both kind of a 1-2 punch, kind of a thunder and lightning group. They're really going to work Beatty into the pass game. Really athletic player. I just want to see how Moses looks coming off the injury and maybe having to mirror a speedy scat back.
Dude, I love this. Okay, so a couple things. Number one, Larry Roundtree. He actually kind of reminds me of a former Alabama running back. I don't think I really liked this player a lot coming out. He hasn't done much in the league yet. That's Damian Harris. Roundtree kind of reminds me of Harris, except I don't think he's quite as talented, but he's just a well-rounded player. I feel like, we had that conversation about backup running backs last week, and I feel like he can be that 3-down backup that just checks a lot of boxes. He can do a little bit of everything. I liked his patience. Pass protection, he's fine. He's got some shake to him. He's just not like a dynamic player like Beatty is. Beatty, to me, is like more, as another kind of backup running back, but he's more of the, hey, he's 5'9", 200 pounds.
He's a 4-4 weapon. Yeah,
yes.
He's a third down returner type of thing. Roundtree, kind of interesting. The only SEC running back coming into the season with 500-plus carries.
Yep.
One of the rare, experienced, solid players in the SEC. They love to turn over those running back positions, obviously getting a lot of young guys in there, but one of the more veteran presence in the SEC.
And then just getting, like you said, just getting a chance to see Dylan Moses again, a guy that, watching, to me, last time we saw him on the field, if we're projecting him for 2021 draft, he's one of the blue chip players in this class in terms of being a physical specimen. What he can do in the pass game, he can play downhill. He's a great athlete. He was a little bit nosy at times, kind of was a little bit undisciplined in terms of his gap responsibility, but he's a really impressive player and a versatile player too, because not only can he do things in pass coverage, but was an outside linebacker in their 3-4 early. That's how he first got on the field. So he's got some pass rush value as well, Ben.
Well, Fran, take us to the other side of the ball, because it's another interesting linebacker running back matchup. Don't go make a sandwich when the field flips.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what, to me, that was the one I wanted to highlight, was Alabama running back Naji Harris against Missouri linebacker Nick Bolton. Now, let's go to Naji Harris first. I like Naji Harris. He's a physical runner. He's not going to be for everybody, and especially you're talking about what can he do is in terms of being like a matchup nightmare and things like that. I think a lot of people will say, he's Derrick Henry, right? He's 6'2", he's 230. Dude, he has some great hands. Remember that catch he made against LSU last year on that vertical route at the pylon? He's got some value in the pass game. He's just not a dynamic athlete. That's where he's not. He's not that kind of a guy. But I'll tell you what, his contact balance is outstanding. You mentioned he had what do you call it? He didn't have 500 carries last year like Roundtree did, but he only fumbled one time in 424 touches last year. So while he's shy of that 500 touch mark, 424 touches last year, not bad. He kind of reminded me a little bit, Ben, of James Conner when he was coming out of Pitt, and Conner's carved out a nice role when healthy for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I do like Naji Harris, and watching him in this game against Nick Bolton. I just said this with Dylan Moses. I think Nick Bolton can be a blue chip player in this class, man. I think he kind of reminds me of a Devin Bush style of player, 6 foot, 235 pounds. He is a spark plug in the middle of that Missouri defense, violent hitter downfield, one of the most violent players in the front seven that I've studied so far. He can play against tight ends in the run game and the pass game. You can see him flexed out against running backs and man-to-man coverage, great blitzer, just a really fun player to study. So, the running back-linebacker matchups in this game, Alabama and Missouri, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, man.
Yeah, Naji Harris is a guy I've compared to Latavius Murray, who's been a really productive
I can see
pro,
that. Yep.
Similar, tall, upright style. But the reason I think Naji Harris has such a high floor is because of a couple of these pillars he checks off. Doesn't fumble the ball.
Yep.
Good hands. Excellent in pass pro. Stays square. Latch is a good thudder in pass protection. Doesn't submarine block. And he's really good in the screen game as well. Good in the open field. Kind of subtle ability in the pass game. So all those kind of things there make me think he's a high floor and kind of a safe pick. He may be a late day 2 player, maybe even an early day 3. But he's a guy that I think is going to be really hard to kick out of your running back 3 or 4 in your room.
I love that. Who's your second matchup you want to watch here?
Well, I didn't mean to stick with another linebacker running back matchup, but we're going to go with 2 guys that I think are going to have some different feel in 2020. We got Jabril Cox down there at LSU, that speedy, athletic, kind of halfway player, really good in the pass game and coverage. And I want to see how Mississippi State works in Kylan Hill in the pass game. More of a traditional runner between the tackle. Now with Mike Leach's offense, they love to get the running backs involved in the pass game. I want to see if maybe those 2 styles have a meeting of minds, maybe out there in the alley, or they have to cover each other one-on-one on third down. Cox was a guy that was motioned out a lot at North Dakota State, had to cover in the pass game quite a bit, more of an athletic linebacker. I want to see if Mike Leach maybe tries to isolate him on Kylan Hill on some third downs, and if Kylan Hill has any value in the pass game to maybe show NFL scouts.
Yeah, I mean, he's got the ability, I think. He just hasn't been always put in the situation. He's going to be put in the situation to catch some passes in this offense. I agree. And 2, to kind of add on to that, how about Jacoby Stevens and seeing him in space against Kylan Hill potentially as well? Obviously it's a new defensive scheme down there in LSU. With Bo Pelini stepping in as the defensive coordinator for Dave Aranda. Stevens is a guy you highlighted him in our SEC preview. I watched him afterwards, and dude, I like him as a linebacker convert, man. I wrote down Mark Barron when watching him. And
that's a great comp, by the way. Great comp.
Dude, I really, really like Stevens. He is a powerful striker. I mean, he essentially spent most of his time down in the box. You could see him play center field, and he could do some things. And I like that versatility. But I'll tell you what, man. I liked the idea of him making that transition to the linebacker spot, and that's not a knock. I think really, really highly of Jacoby Stevens. I really like that matchup. I'm going to go second one here, and I'm going to go to the ACC. And historically, one of my favorite games to watch on a yearly basis had been Florida State versus Miami. And both teams have been, down a little bit over the last few years. Dude, I kind of like this with the way that we're kind of seeing Brevin Jordan, all right, who we've talked about each of the last 2 Mondays. He got my game ball this week. He got your game ball last week. Going up against Florida State and Hamza Nasruddin, the talented safety for the Seminoles. Now, he missed the first game of the year against Georgia Tech because of that knee injury that cost him the back end of 2019. So it looks like he is poised to make his debut this week against Miami. Dude, he is going to be a huge part of trying to keep Brevin Jordan out of the end zone. That is a matchup I'm really excited about. I'm excited about both players. I'm really high on Nasruddin. He's one of my favorite safeties in this class, if not my favorite safety in this class. Both guys, really unique athletes for the position. What are your thoughts on that matchup?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Brevin Jordan, kind of a pedestrian numbers last year in that matchup against Florida State, only 6 catches for, 48 yards. So I want to see if maybe they can get him isolated in space a little bit more, or some downfield shot plays in Rhett Lashley's new offense at Miami.
Yeah, no question. So there'll be the matchups that we're both most excited to see, coming up this weekend. Obviously,
there were a couple that were tough to pick in the SEC. I want to see how Kyle Trask looks against that Ole Miss defense, or very subtly, University of Kentucky has a really good offensive line. There's about 3 NFL prospects on that D-line going against a big Auburn defensive line with Big Cat Bryant and a couple other NFL prospects. So SEC plays back, a lot of players to watch.
Yeah, I'm like kind of buzzing through, and there are a bunch of matchups we could have talked about.
It was tough to pick, Fran. It was tough to focus on too there.
I'm just excited to have like semi-full slate, this weekend. We get the SEC back. It's been great to have the ACC and the Big 12. We got some good Big 12 matchups this week. Texas Tech certainly is one to follow. This is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to some of the things.
Louisville Pitt, first ranked there as well. So I feel like we've been talking about the ACC so much lately.
I know, that's the thing, is that we've been talking about them so often. We'll be picking some of these games later in the show with Ross Tucker. So make sure you stay tuned for our Pick 6 segment at the very end of the show. All right, let's go to a mock draft roundup here. We're going to pick a mock draft every single week, look at who they have the Eagles selecting, but then also just kind of look at who else is going in that area. So we're going to go to CBS Sports. Ryan Wilson has the Eagles picking at 13th overall in his most recent mock draft. The 5 going before the Eagles. Here they go. Number 8, Detroit Lions taking Ohio State quarterback Justin Fields, so the successor to Matthew Stafford there in Detroit. Number 9 overall, the Denver Broncos selecting pass rusher Greg Rousseau out of Miami. Number 10, the Miami Dolphins taking offensive guard Wyatt Davis from Ohio State. Number 11, we just talked about this guy, Alabama linebacker Dylan Moses going to the Atlanta Falcons. Number 12 overall, the Minnesota Vikings taking the hometown kid, quarterback Trey Lance from North Dakota State. Ben, what's your feeling on those 5 picks there?
Well, fun picks there. I'd love to see Trey Lance there stay in the central north in the country there and stay in the Minnesota Vikings. I feel like they would love that pick, and the fan base would really rally around that. Obviously, Kirk Cousins, big money. He's kind of the incumbent starter. Would like somebody to create a little bit more outside of structure. And I think Trey Lance can do that with his athleticism. And how about Justin Fields being the successor to Matt Stafford in Detroit? What does that mean? Does he do a kind of an apprentice year behind him or two? Or maybe Matt Stafford goes and takes a late in the career flyer with a team like the Colts, or maybe another team that's ready to roll and make a run. I'd love to see Matt Stafford in a new home. Yeah,
and to me, Trey Lance would be a really interesting fit in that Minnesota offense. If the offense stayed the same, you're looking at a guy that has that ability to roll out. It's a run-first offense. I mean, that's what he ran last year at North Dakota State. Like, plug and play in terms of, it's not going to be much of an adjustment for him in terms of, making the transition to that scheme. For me, it was just Wyatt Davis going 10. You got to be an elite prospect, I think, at the guard spot to go 10 overall. I think a lot of people do view Davis that way. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of how he's perceived over the next few months, if that kind of improves here moving forward. We're going to talk about Davis a little bit in the very next segment here with Austin Ward.
I would love the commitment that the Dolphins would be showing to the offensive line, particularly last year, getting Austin Jackson, Solomon Kinley, Robert Hunt, to then take the 10th overall pick and go with another trench player. Yep. I think that's the foundation of teams. We both kind of agree with that. You got Tua, you have some weapons, but if you don't have that motor oil on the O-line or the D-line or in the trenches, it doesn't matter how sexy those perimeter players are.
So you look at the 5 after the Eagles. Again, the Eagles picking at 13. 14th overall, the LA Chargers taking wide receiver Jalen Waddle, so getting a weapon there for Justin Herbert. At 15th overall, the Las Vegas Raiders taking pass rusher Kwity Paye. The Browns selecting Hamza Nasruddin, the safety we just talked about from Florida State. 17th overall, the Chicago Bears taking Alabama wideout Devontae Smith. And then 18th overall, the Colts taking TCU safety Trevon Moehrig. Ben, give us your takeaway here on those 5 picks.
Well, I love the pick for the Chargers, adding a speedy, big play threat, for Justin Herbert to pair with Keenan Allen, some of those other weapons like Mike Williams. That Chargers offense has to be ready to compete in the division. The Broncos,
that would complement those guys well, right? You
No
have
question.
You have the crafty route runner. You got the big guy in Williams. How about the speedster in Waddle?
Yeah, exactly. And, I just feel like the Raiders going to get Ruggs last year. We know the Chiefs offense, the Broncos, KJ Hamler, Jerry Jeudy, they went and got speed last year. At AFC West, you better be ready to light up the scoreboard. So I love the Chargers adding another weapon on the outside for the young Herbert.
That's a good point. I like that. The Raiders taking a pass rusher around one would surprise me a little bit. Obviously, we know, they took Cleveland Farrell in the top 5 a year ago. They took Max Crosby in the same draft, and he was a hit on day 3. So they feel, those are the 2 starters there. I believe they've got some other vets, younger vets there as well. So taking another pass rusher in the top 15, no less, would be a little bit surprising to me overall. Let's go now to the Eagles selection. 13th overall. They take Northwestern offensive lineman Rashawn Slater. We talked about him in our Big Ten preview. I know Dane is a big fan of his. You and I have both talked about him in the past as well. Here is the blurb from Ryan Wilson here. Slater was a dominant left tackle last season, played right tackle the 2 seasons before that. Meanwhile, the Eagles have been decimated by injuries. 2019 first-rounder Andre Dillard should be fully healthy to begin the 2021 campaign. What are your thoughts there, Ben, on Rashawn Slater at 13th overall? What do you think of the value there?
I love the pick. Experienced player, over 2,700 career snaps, 37 starts, experience on the left side, right side. Last year's tape was impressive. No sacks allowed, 1 QB hit, only 5 pressures. Go right to that Ohio State tape and how he handled, second overall pick Chase Young, which everybody points to now as like his, kind of swan song tape to go put on. But I really think he may be a guard conversion, though, Fran.
I think so, too.
My comp at the moment is Joel Petonio, coming out of Nevada. Very similar height, weight, length, 6'4", about 310, aggressive, great lateral movement in the zone game, really good power and double teams in the gap and kind of power schemes. Struggled a little bit with some inside moves here and there. I'm just not sure he's going to have the length to hang out on the outside there, but he's proven in the Big Ten. He can handle NFL caliber edge rushers. It'll probably let him feast or famine out there first. But having a little tackle guard flexibility is okay. Whether he reminds me a little bit of Braden Smith as well, coming out of Auburn 2 years ago, and has really ended up being a nice player for the Colts. So I think having a guy that can maybe go back and forth, guard, tackle, isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, and we know the Eagles value versatility along the offensive line. I said, my comp for him before was Laken Tomlinson, a former first-round pick who's going to be a starter, or who is a starter for the San Francisco 49ers on the left side. So, to me, I would be a little bit shocked about him in the top 15, just my own personal evaluation. I know Dane views him as kind of like a fringe first-rounder as well. So, but no, he's a rock-solid player and has been doing it for a long time. And he came on campus and started as a true freshman. So, Rashawn Slater, a very intriguing player. For sure, very experienced guy,
and looking to be one of the higher picks in the Pat Fitzgerald era.
He would be the first. He would be the first round pick for Pat Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Patty Fisher is going to have enough of a season to squeeze into the first round, but would be exciting because Pat Fitzgerald puts out a lot of good pros, productive players. Yep. Whether it's Justin Jackson, Austin Carr, Dean Lowry, Tyler Lancaster, really good kind of blue collar players, and it seems like Rashawn Slater is going to be another one.
I would agree with that.
Where'd Laken Tomlinson go to school? Duke?
Laken Tomlinson was Duke.
Yeah, okay.
He was Duke. And I believe he was I'm trying to remember if he was a tackle there as well. I'm pretty sure he was a guard in college.
I think he had a big Senior Bowl week.
He was. Yes, he was. Yeah. I know he was a guard at the Senior Bowl.
Was one of the few people to block Danny Shelton that year, and I think that's what really ascended his stock.
All right, well, let's transition to our last segment here, Ben, and that is Under the Hood, where we're going to pick one position and 3 factors or traits that matter most to us when we're evaluating that spot. And ironically, we're talking about the conversion of tackle to guard. So I want to talk about the offensive tackle position today, and we're going to focus on the guys that start at tackle. There's been so much about the delineation between left tackle, right tackle. To me, I think you put them all in one bucket. It's all about comfort level with these guys. I'm not worried about who's on the blind side, who's on the front side. What are the traits that you look for at offensive tackle? We'll kind of go back and forth here. I'll let you go first.
So the first one is I'm going to try to avoid the physical talk right off the bat. because it's such a mental position, Fran. So the football intelligence, the processing, the mental toughness, I think are so important for the offensive line positions. It's a complicated position. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of different fronts and a lot of adjustments, not only pre-snap, but post-snap, on the fly. I can't have dummies on the offensive line. I need to have guys that understand the game, understand their responsibility, understand the responsibility of the people adjacent to them as well, because you're really working as a unit. So you need to understand every position. And then you can go even further to just the mental toughness aspect. We could talk for an hour about pain, hurt, injuries. Are you willing to play through stuff? Or do you have that mental kind of acclimate to understand when you're hurt or when you're injured, and your practice ability and your ability to play late in games? And I got news for you. In the fourth quarter, everybody's hurt. But are you injured? Can you play through it? Can you rally for another 4 seconds on the next snap? These are all things that really don't have anything to do with your play strength, your physicality, your size, but just between the ears. And I think it's a position that gets overlooked so much. We think about quarterback. We need our quarterback to be a nerd and be the book smart guy and the general. The offensive lineman, you can't survive being the dummy up front. So first and foremost, the mental toughness, the mental acclimate, I think is a huge factor.
Yeah, I've had these conversations a lot with scouts and with offensive line coaches as well. And it's like, are there positions where you can get away with it, more or less, without saying like, oh yeah, like, can you have a dummy all across the line? But I think when the closer you get to the ball, the more important that football intelligence is. So obviously, if you're a center, you're a guy that's making the calls and setting the protections. You need that guy to be upper echelon in terms of his football intelligence. Then you get to guard. The things are happening fast. You're dealing with stunts. You're having to read what's going on, and then you get to tackle. And maybe you're put on an island a little bit more. Maybe you've got that ability to just say, hey, you know what? I'm manned up over here. You still have to be a certain level of football and have to have that football intelligence. But it's interesting to kind of have that conversation with people. How does that rank with a tackle versus a guard or a center?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I did this with the pure thought of tackle. Could go even further once you get into center and setting protection, setting mic points, identifying potential blitz threats. There's a lot going on. Not only just doing your job and your responsibility, but assessing the defensive picture on a down-to-down basis, understanding where the potential threats are. These are all things outside of your responsibility you have to do in combination. Your brain is constantly churning in the course of a game.
So for me, I'm going to go over to a physical trait, and foot quickness is obviously one that we always talk about, right? And that's you've got to be able to protect against the speed rushers and the NFL provides, and not necessarily the speed rushers, but just the threat of edge pressure. And it's not just can you get to the outside, is can you react to an inside move as well? If a guy sells an upfield rush and then bends it back, if you're facing against a stunt and you have to try and react to a looper last second, do you have that foot quickness, that change of direction, that comfort moving in reverse to be able to mirror those kind of pass rushers? How often do we see, unathletic offensive linemen unable to kind of recover and make that kind of a play? So for foot quickness, to me, that's one that it's almost a non-negotiable at this point. If you don't have that, you need to have outstanding length and just that sheer size where you're just tough to get around. That's the thing where I think you can kind of have that sliding scale a little bit, is if you're just a big, long monster of a tackle, you could maybe give up a little bit in terms of that foot quickness just because you've got the length to overcome it. But, I think you still need a certain level of that athletic ability.
This works out perfectly because I'll quickly move to my point, which is very much hand in hand with the foot quickness, in that you can't just be quick-footed. You must also be balanced. And I think balance is so important for offensive linemen. You're constantly moving from your position, whether it's getting vertical displacement, immediately lateral, taking vertical sets and trying to pass protect. You're reacting to things. You're moving very swiftly, very violently in little bursts in order to be able to mirror and react to defenses. And in the same combination, you have to be very patient as well, because it's a reactive position for the most part in pass protection. So if you can move your feet and move your body, but if you aren't able to do it in a balanced manner, you won't be able to survive. And I think having that balance and be able to play under control and play within your frame. And we see that all the time, guys falling on their face or awkward footed or having to react to inside moves or stunts, or maybe one go one direction and immediately swing back the other direction. Fran, it's not always easy to move 330 pounds left and then back right. If you don't have balance in combination with all your ability, your strength, your foot quickness, your length, your mental processing, you're not going to survive a day in the NFL.
Well, and that's why, my last one is just your ability to recover, and I think that shows up in a number of different ways, but it's, it was pointed out to me by a guy that I really trust in terms of evaluating offensive linemen, and that can show up in a number of different ways, but your balance is absolutely a big part of that foot quickness, that twitch, but also the mental acuity as well. That ability, you're going to get beat. It's just like playing corner in the NFL. You're going to get beat by guys on a daily basis when you play offensive line. It's your ability to recover. It's not always going to be pretty, but can you stay upright and be able to find a way to finish the down, keep your quarterback clean, keep your running back clean? That ability to recover just so important.
An offensive line coach once told me, he said, I need my guys to be under control at all times because there's plenty of maulers out there, but the out of control mauler is the one that gets beat up by the nerd on the playground. If you're not under control in combination with your strength and your length and your aggressiveness, it's all going to be for nothing. You're going to get punched in the nose because you don't have that base and that foot kind of structure to operate and get your job done.
Is there a trait that separates the elite from the good players at this position in your mind?
I really feel passionately about this, Fran. It's another one where you take all the physical stuff out. There's a lot of big guys in the NFL. There's a lot of guys that look great, have the length, have the strength, have the foot quickness, have the test scores. But if you don't have that competitive edge, Fran, if you don't have that want in combination with all that physical, it's all for nothing. And we've seen guys get drafted in the top 10, looked the part, looked like they were built in, like I like to say, a lab or a petri dish, but there was something missing. And, I think about guys like Luke Joeckel of the world. He looked like an absolute technician coming out of Texas A&M, but didn't have that competitive edge to fight and survive at tackle in the NFL. And I think if you don't have that edge, or that's what really separates a B player to an A player, that could really change your game and change who you are as a prospect and your ability to be successful in the NFL.
Totally agree. And I'm always looking for guys that have that edge, because the traits are all, the traits can be there, but if you don't have that competitive edge, those competitive juices, it's tough to kind of coach that into a guy. You can light it a little bit. And again, I think also that's another one where you can kind of forgive that a little bit at tackle if he's got all the other traits. If he's got that ability to be a pure blindside protector, the prototype, left tackle, all that, then yeah, you're willing to forgive that a little bit. But in terms of this question, in terms of separating like who are the guys versus the good, yeah, I would totally agree with that.
In a weird way, it kind of goes hand in hand with your last trait and your ability to recover. Because things go wrong on a down-to-down basis for offensive linemen, whether you get your foot stepped on, your hands knocked down, you get beat with a move, you have to keep playing. You have to keep fighting. He might have his hands up on your throat or in your face mask. You don't get to stop. You have to keep fighting and play through it, and your ability to recover, in a lot of sense, is reflective of that competitive edge. And the guys that can keep fighting while getting punched in the nose or finishing to the whistle. And there's a lot of ways to kind of expound upon what competitive edge means. But I think in combination with your ability to recover, they kind of go hand in hand.
So you talk about like anchor strength, right? And a guy's ability to drop his anchor, hold up against a bull rush. That's pivotal. That is a top 3 trait for me along the offensive tackle spot. But now when you're saying, okay, what's something that separates the great from the good? I'm going to build off your competitive edge point and say the guys that have power. And we talk about what's the difference between strength and power. The way that's been defined to me in the past is a guy that can take on another man's momentum, the guy that's trying to move him against his will and hold his own ground. That's strength. If you are moving somebody else against their will, that's power. And that can be tough to be able to find in the college ranks because you don't always see those guys that have that consistent level of power. I talked about that in the past with Trey Smith. We've talked about it with Penny Sewell, right? Those guys that have that, they're just different. They've got that ability to move people at the point of attack. And to me, like the guys that come out of the league and or come out of the college ranks and they've got the foot quickness, and they've got the edge and then the play strength. That's all well and good. That's all good stuff. You need all of that. But the guys that have that power, that functional power to be able to move people as well, that to me is a difference maker in my mind.
Fran, I'm going to put you on the spot just for a second here. But when you look at some of the elites at the positions that aren't physically gifted, whether it's maybe Mitchell Schwartz at right tackle for the Chiefs or David Bakhtiari, left tackle for the Packers. It's easy to look at a Tyreke Smith and say, well, do what he's doing. He's big, he's burly, he's strong, he looks like an absolute freak show tank. But what is it about Mitchell Schwartz and Bakhtiari that they get their jobs done on a down-to-down, week-to-week basis, yet maybe aren't physically imposing?
Well, that's what's tough, man. And that to me, and that's why Mitchell Schwartz. He was a late round draft pick, if I remember correctly. And I know Bakhtiari was like a 4th round pick for Green Bay. You don't see those guys typically go that high, and also to the second point of that, the guys that do go high that have maybe they're missing some of these traits, but oh man, they're technically sound. Not many of them work out, man. I mean, if you look in years past and say, like, all right, who are the guys that kind of fit that bill, whether we're talking tackle, guard, or center, the Eagles are playing a team right now in the Cincinnati Bengals this week that have they took Billy Price, and he was kind of seen that way, he's not an A-plus athlete. He's not a super powerful guy. It's going to move people, but really smart, really technically sound. Hasn't been able to find his footing. You would say the same thing about Pat Elflein in Minnesota. We're talking tackles here, and those guys are interior guys, but I think the point still kind of stands that it's so hard to be able to figure out, like, yeah, this guy has it. Mitchell Schwartz has it. David Bakhtiari has it. But this other bucket of the other 30 guys that look like them and have those traits and maybe not quite as technically refined, but we can coach them up. It's tough, man, right? Like, am I crazy about it? That's tough to me. Like, that's why you see so many of those guys typically fall to the third round, the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round. As hard as a quality starting tackle play is to find, it's tough to delineate the guys that don't have the traits and say that's the guy that's going to be able to stick out of this group.
I just feel like we fall in love with the physical traits so often in that first round. And I know some guys lately, like you had mentioned, the Billy Prices and Elflines and, some of those interior guys starting to go earlier. But I just feel like the NFL scouts, the NFL game, they just love like the Greg Robinsons of the world. They just can't help themselves with the size, the strength, the length, the weight, I just feel like those players are becoming less and less effective, and you're looking more for that. Hey, I know Bakhtiari's got a 3rd round grade and he looks like a 3rd round tackle, but this guy could be a 10-year pro in the NFL. He just doesn't maybe fit the sexy mold of some of those 1st round picks.
I mean, I'm just looking at who are the starting tackles in the NFL right now that kind of fit that mold that you're talking about, right? I mean, you mentioned David Bakhtiari, you mentioned Mitchell Schwartz. I'm just kind of scrolling down the list here, and I'm just going to start throwing out starting tackles. All right, so Ronnie Stanley, obviously he's a traits guy. Dwayne Brown, really athletic player. You have Trent Brown, who's just a house. Ryan Ramczyk, Deion Dawkins, I think kind of fits that, right? In terms of what we're talking about, I think then you start looking and it's like.
It was like the Colton Millers and like Mike McGlinchey's of the world that have been 1st round picks over the last 3-4 years that I think are starting to change the mold.
I mean, Jake Matthews was that kind of guy, right? Taylor or not Taylor Lewan. Who's the kid in Detroit? Taylor Decker. Yeah. I think he would probably fit that mold. Eric Fisher's been initially people thought he wasn't going to work out, but he's been a starting left tackle for how many years now for Kansas City. There are guys that certainly are able to make it. Charles Leno in Chicago would be another guy I'd put in that. It's not like
it's just funny how it's so reflective on where you're drafted too. If Eric Fisher gets taken where David Bakhtiari is, the team's up in arms with how much of a steal that is in the draft. But because he's the 1st overall pick, his career is now, ripped to shreds through evaluations, and everybody's trying to figure out if the pick was worth it or not. I think the draft slot aesthetics get wrapped into it as well.
No question. Now let's try to make the transition to this draft. Who were the tackles that you studied that kind of check some of the boxes we're talking about? Because I'll tell you, Penny Sewell checks like all the boxes, in terms of like the traits we're talking and like the mental stuff and everything. You've talked about how there are some things off the field he's got to continue to work through from a maturity standpoint. But when you're talking about what we've seen on tape, I mean, he is outstanding. After that, the guy that really just kind of catches my eye is Daniel Faalele from Minnesota. He's still young. But I'll tell you what, man, when you talk about like that power, the ability to displace people, but also, I mean, his size, his foot quickness, he's really impressive. And when I'm looking at the tackle spot, I'm like, he's tough to move. He's got the anchor strength. He's got enough foot quickness. The traits are all there. To me, he's a tough guy to kind of pass up on. I can't imagine that he lasts too long in draft weekend.
Yeah, two guys I look right at, the guys that are balanced, controlled, rarely on the ground, effective in the run and the pass game, experienced. I'm looking right at Alex Leatherwood and Walker Little for Stanford. Two guys that I don't know if they're going to be worthy of top 10 selections, but I bet they go in that 10 to 20 range, and the teams that they go to are going to be extremely happy, and they're going to be those kind of safe picks on the board.
Yeah, it's an interesting class of tackles. We've talked about it before. It's not like a group where we expect 3 or 4 or 5 to go in the top 20 or 25, but certainly one guy we didn't talk about, Sam Cosmi from Texas. That's got some love and has some fans around the NFL. Ben, this was a fun conversation. Thanks so much for joining us once again here on Saturday Scouting. We'll talk to you on Monday with Dan.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, joining me this week on Mr. Relevant on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, Austin Ward, who covers the Ohio State Buckeyes. You can follow him on Twitter at @AWardSports. Austin, thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks, Fran. I know it's been a hectic time, and I was supposed to come on a few weeks ago, but I think we all have to be flexible and adjust, so I appreciate you giving me that rain check and letting me come back in today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Obviously, look, I kind of want to start things off that way. What were the last few weeks like for you? Because we were trying to get you on as the Big Ten was making the announcement. What has it been like for you, kind of covering the team, covering the story of the Big Ten? First canceling and then postponing and then coming back, and then also, what's it been like for the team themselves? Like, were they working out? Were the coaches still going pedal to the metal? Did they hit the pause button so they didn't peak during this time away? What has it been like on both sides of it?
I can only imagine what it's like for the players and the coaches and families that were directly impacted by this, because it's been an emotional roller coaster, and some of the one of the most challenging stories that I've had to cover in my career, because you don't often hear, a full-scale cancellation in the fall, and then a commissioner and president's doubling down on that and saying they're not going to revisit the situation. And then you have petitions and lawsuits and, Ohio State coach Ryan Day calling out the league and demanding, answers to play. Like, it seemed like there was something new every single day, just a real soap opera and drama to play out. It was hard to cover and hard to get to the bottom of it, but and also a lot of getting to know the health impact and myocarditis and things I never dreamed of in my career. But there was a lot of relief, I'll put it this way, when it was over. I think there's still going to be challenges coming for all those people involved, and us as well in the media, with potentially cancellations and positive tests and all that. But relief that there's going to be football. And as Ohio State was practicing, to the second part of your question, Fran, they haven't been able to be in anything other than, helmets and spider pads. They'll put on the full pads on September 30th. So, they got another week to go before training camp ramps up. So it was hard for Ohio State and the Buckeyes to keep going. 12-hour work weeks. You could just go out twice, and you could work out, and they could have some meetings, but it was basically just, stay as ready as possible until you get the green light. And that was a big challenge for Ryan Day. He's faced a number of them in his career, but these guys didn't know what they were working for when they were having those 12-hour work weeks. They didn't know if they were going to get a chance to play, and it's hard to stay ready if you don't have a goal in mind. But I think you looked at these people that had so much they wanted to accomplish this year. This is a national title contender. They were still holding out hope until it was fully extinguished, and unfortunately for them, it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, obviously, and one of the players that was kind of like at the forefront of all this, you talked about everything that had gone on over the last few weeks, was certainly the quarterback Justin Fields, and he is the first player that I want to ask you about, because we talk about the presence of a quarterback, and just the leadership and all of those off-field traits. And I feel like I said this earlier this week on the show that the last couple of months have really kind of painted Justin Fields in a really positive light. And we talked about that with Trevor Lawrence, and I think you're seeing that with Fields as well with the Buckeyes. And I just kind of want to ask you, because following Justin Fields through high school recruiting, because the recruiting cycle was obviously crazy for him, with commitments and decommitments, and finally landing at Georgia. Then the departure from Georgia was obviously very eventful, and there was a lot that was loaded in with that situation. So I got to ask you, like, what has he been like to cover? What is your sense on him as a kid? You've been around guys that, have been like the pinnacle of the off-field characters like J.T. Barrett, who I know like Urban Meyer and that staff absolutely adored. You've been around a lot of guys who just understood what it took to be a pro. They got it off the field, and they've been able to carve out really good NFL careers because of those off-field traits. Do you feel like Justin Fields is one of those guys? How do you view him away from the field in terms of his leadership and his command of the locker room and things of that nature?
I think that was the real, big question for him going into last year, because when he arrived in January, last January, after what happened at Georgia and getting the waiver for instant eligibility, everybody assumed based on his physical gifts that he would win the job. He's one of the most talented athletes and quarterbacks that I've ever been around. And you look at I don't throw that praise around lightly, considering Dwayne Haskins was a Heisman finalist the year before Fields arrived. And, there was a quarterback room with J.T. Barrett and Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow and, Cardale Jones won a national championship. I could go on down the line, Braxton Miller with his athleticism. And you could tell physically that Justin Fields had pieces of all of those guys. What you didn't know was if you would have the toughness or the leadership or the ability to speak up the way some of those other guys have. Most, like J.T. Barrett, as you said, had become the gold standard for that. And I think what you saw last year was that really progressively grew for him, that comfort leading the huddle, even if they don't huddle full time at Ohio State, but leading the offense, having to get through to guys with the job that needs to be done and motivate others. But what pushed it over the top was a number of might be viewed as minor injuries or whatever, but then that knee sprain that lingered for 6-7 weeks at the end of the year, he never he was hurt. He was not at full strength, and he battled through all of that. And I think that's when he really proved to the teammates, to the rest of the Buckeyes, how important he was, how important it was to him to be there for his teammates, to perform at a high level and not make any excuses, which he never did, even though I know for a fact that he hated that bulky knee brace. And you've built from there with the petition and becoming a captain, and it's all been very impressive to watch that maturity develop with him. And, he could have easily taken an opt-out route. I think we all know that he'd be a first-round draft pick. He didn't do that. We talked to him last Friday. He said he never even thought about it. Until all hope was dead of this season being played, he wanted to be with his teammates. He wanted to be a captain. He wants to win a Heisman Trophy as well. He's not embarrassed to admit that, and he also wants to win a national championship. So you add that all up, and this kid's as mature as you'll find anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, all of that is good stuff, and that's going to be music to a lot of people's ears, certainly in the NFL. Another guy I want to ask you about is a linebacker, Baron Browning. Obviously played a huge role last year as a backup off the bench. I want to ask you how he's kind of viewed in the building going into his final season on campus. Are there hopes that he's going to step up as one of the leaders of that defense? Obviously, they've lost a couple of guys there, but there are still some guys. I mean, Tough Borland is obviously still there. A couple of the other line, Pete Werner's still there. But they've lost some guys on the front end and on the back end with Chase Young and Okudah and Jordan Fuller. How do they view Baron Browning going into this year?
Yeah, I think you look at him if you're Ohio State and Kerry Combs returning as the defensive coordinator. I think they look at him as a real valuable chess piece. Part of the storyline for Baron Browning's career has been, well, where do you use him best? So many people thought when he arrived, 5-star was going to be a projected middle linebacker. Then Ohio State needed him outside. There have been times where he's, gone out before pregame and he's worked with the famed defensive line coach Larry Johnson, and Ohio State has turned him loose as an edge rusher. There's something to be said for his versatility. Now, there's also part of it when you look at his production, and NFL teams will be having this conversation, no doubt, in February through April next year. And it's not maybe what people would think with someone with his physical tools. And that's just because it's been hard he's had to move between positions and learn so many different responsibilities that I don't think he's ever had a true chance to make a position his own and get comfortable. There's been a kind of a running gag with him about where he feels most comfortable, inside or outside, every spring, which was a shortened one for him this year, which also won't help. But it was clear that Ohio State was willing to just find ways to deploy him last year. He was slowed midway through the season, kind of another fluke injury with a core muscle strain that really bothered him. And Ohio State's defense is not the same when he's not out there to be sort of that bonus piece in a matchup problem, because he can do so many things. Ohio State absolutely loves him, and there was a real chance that he could have gone pro, and having him back for another year is a big deal. But if you're trying to figure out where is Baron Browning going to pop up, it's hard to know from week to week, and that's also the challenge that opposing offensive coordinators face.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting just with, obviously the departure of Malik Harrison. There's the role that is available there for him to kind of jump in. I'm really intrigued by his skill set. I talked about him earlier this week on the show as well. Let's go back to the offensive side. We know the big names coming in. We've talked about Justin Fields. You got the running backs there with, Master Teague and Trey Sermon, Chris Olave, one of the best receivers in college football. Wyatt Davis back in the fold after initially opting out. He's back on campus. But is there a guy that's under the radar right now nationally that, a year and a half ago, we didn't know who Jeffrey Okudah was, and he ends up being a top 5 pick? Is there a guy that you feel is ready to make that next step now that, there's a guy on offense you say, he's going to be a guy everyone's talking about here in a few months?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised at how little conversation there is about center Josh Myers for the Buckeyes. I think in Columbus, he's well known. He went into last year. He was a full-time starter. I think he was the best center in the Big Ten, just from having watched what he did every single week. He's Wyatt Davis gets a lot more attention than him, and some of that's justified. Wyatt Davis is a generational talent at guard. So I don't know if he totally fits the bill of what you're looking for, Fran, but this guy, after 1 year, I thought he was good enough to declare for the draft. He didn't want to do that. He's another one that you can lump in that category of could have declared for the draft, would have been drafted, is physically ready to do that, but also wanted to become a captain and play for a national title. I would expect him to soar up draft boards, similar to what Pat Elflein and Billy Price and some other centers have done for Ohio State over the last few years. A guy that I think is really worth watching, who's going to put up numbers, and people in Columbus haven't got to really watch him yet, except for when he was scoring for the Oklahoma Sooners a few years ago, was Trey Sermon, the running back. I think he's a perfect fit. He was in a similar system with Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma. Now, I've talked to a number of people inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center about what this guy brings to the table. They view him as a perfect weapon for what they do at running back. Really excited about his maturity. He left Oklahoma just because they had, he was unsure what his role was going to be. It was his last year of eligibility, his graduate transfer. Wasn't sure how great of a shot he would get coming off of a knee injury last year and in Oklahoma playing for the future. Well, Ohio State recruited this guy initially coming out of high school. He had a relationship built in. He visited already. Tony Alford, the running backs coach, who'd worked with Robbins and Mike Weber and others. That was one of the most significant offseason pickups, I think, in all of college football. So right up the middle there, I continue to always look at Ohio State running backs, and I think that the center position has become that same marquee group there for the Buckeyes.
I'm so glad you brought up Josh Myers. Watching him, I talked about him in our Big Ten preview back in the summer. I kind of liked him as much, or not, if not more, than Wyatt Davis. And I know there are some people inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center that agree with that. So it's going to be interesting to see the pub that Josh Myers gets over the next few months, or hopefully a couple of years for Buckeyes fans if he's able to stay on campus another year. Defense, same question. Let's go to the defensive side. Is there a guy on defense that you feel we'll all be talking about here coming up?
Yeah, my guess is that everybody else in the secondary, that's the easy way to go for the Buckeyes. There's Josh Proctor. He's got big shoes to fill at safety with Jordan Fuller moving on. We've seen what he's already doing with the Los Angeles Rams, and made a couple big plays in their win over the Cowboys in Week 1. He's replacing a real pro and a captain that was as respected as anybody on the roster for the Buckeyes. He is one of the most physically gifted players at Ohio State. It's a mouthful, but I've been talking and waiting for 2 years to see Josh Proctor explode. He could be in line for sort of Malik Hooker type 1 year deal where you jump to the next level and jump into draft boards. He's a ball hawk. He is a vicious hitter. he is an absolute freak back there. I think that's a name that people are – and look, people are going to have to get to know him. If he's not ready to be that safety, then the Ohio State secondary is going to have some problems. They are a little inexperienced, but you got Sevyn Banks and Cameron Brown that are right there ready to step in alongside Shaun Wade at corner. Sevyn Banks in particular, this guy, he looked completely different when we got glimpses at him coming off his offseason. The cornerback streak of first-round draft picks for the Buckeyes is not going to end. Those guys can add their name to it along with Shaun Wade. We'll see what happens with their development this year. But, you always start there. And then Tyreke Smith at defensive end is another guy who he was supposed to be the one to take the torch from Chase Young. We'll see if he can. He's been plagued by injuries a little bit, but he's another five-star guy, another huge upside defensive end. And Larry Johnson has proven time and time again that he knows how to get the most out of those guys.
Awesome. You're making me feel good about my Big Ten preview, man. Josh Proctor was my sleeper for the Big Ten coming into the year. I had heard that same kind of buzz a couple of years ago about he could be Malik Hooker. He could be Malik Hooker. So glad to hear you bring his name up first. Austin, thanks so much, man, for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll hopefully talk to you again soon here coming up.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Before we keep going with this episode, I want to just take a quick moment to remind you guys that we are just under 2 months away from Election Day on November 3rd. And did you guys know that 4 years ago in the last election, 100 million eligible voters did not participate? That is insane to me. That is a crazy high number. It does not matter who you support, but that number is entirely too high. So I've got some questions for you. Number one, are you registered to vote? Number two, do you know where you vote in your district, and have you checked to see if you can vote early? Do you know what time your polling place opens? Voting matters, not just for this presidential election, but for your local and state elections as well. Please, it's all of our civic duty to make sure that our voices are heard. Get out and vote on November 3rd. Text EAGLES, EAGLES, to 26797 to register to vote.
Now it's time for Pick Six.
All right, back for another edition of Pick Six here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA, our good friend Ross Tucker. Ross, welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I look forward to this every week, even though I then notice on Saturday that it didn't go real well for me last week. Not going to lie. Everyone, I was like, oh, no, I'm getting crushed by Fran, I think. But, it still is fun, though, because it makes it some – I'm watching Notre Dame, South Florida. I'm watching these games, Miami, Louisville, and trying to have the outcome I predict to happen. So it definitely makes it more entertaining and more interesting. Plus, this week, we get the SEC back, which is great.
Yeah, no question. We've got some good games to talk about here today. Just a quick refresher. You went 2-4 last week. That brought your record to 4-8. I went 4-2. That brought my record to 7-5. So only a 3-game swing right now. It's still anybody's game here as we move forward into the third week of doing this. Let's get into our first matchup here. And the first one's going to be a straight up pick the winner, Ross. And this is going to be Tennessee, South Carolina. We've got the opener for both teams. You said it, SEC back on the field this weekend. The Vols blew the doors off South Carolina last year. It was 41-21, but you got a new offensive coordinator for South Carolina, Mike Bobo. They've made some changes there, but still you lose a top pick in Javon Kinlaw. You lose Brian Edwards. You lose DJ Wanham, some other key players on the defensive front seven. You lose their starting center. Who do you like here and why?
So I like Tennessee. You already named several of the reasons why. Now, I think we all know that with everything that happened and this being the opener, funny things can happen, and you really don't even know in this era which guys might be out or in for COVID-related reasons. Seems like especially in college football, there will be special teams miscues. But I'm going to go with Tennessee. They've got some absolute horses up front. I could watch Trey Smith play all day, every day.
Oh, yeah.
He is such a bully. Emory Hunt on the College Draft podcast this week said he's a check the birth certificate guy, which I thought was awesome. And we were laughing because when he was a freshman, he was killing dudes.
Yeah.
I mean, he was killing kids as a freshman. So, and the Gamecocks, Brian Edwards, we saw what he did for the Raiders. Kinlaw, Plus, they have a new quarterback. This other kid beat out Helinski, so they got to break in a new quarterback. I'll take Tennessee. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar score to last year.
Yeah, I'm actually going to take the Vols too. And it's just, you look at Tennessee, it was an ugly start to last year. Remember, they had a couple losses. I think they lost to an FCS team. They definitely lost to a group of 5 team. It was like a 1-4 start or something like. It was a really ugly start to the season. But then they came out at the end of the year and really, really crushed it down the stretch. And one of those games was this South Carolina game. I feel like Tennessee's just got a lot of momentum, despite the fact that they've gotten some up and down quarterback play over the last couple of years with Jared Guarantano. But I think when you look at the Vols, the defense is starting to come together. I will also take Tennessee. Trey Smith is also a beast. He is awesome. He's one of my favorite players in the conference, one of my favorite players in this draft. I said it during our SEC preview. He was my favorite SEC senior on the offensive side of the ball. I just feel like this guy is just tailor-made for the NFL. There are a lot of teams that could really use a Trey Smith. So, yeah, wholeheartedly agree here. I will take the Vols in this game as well. All right, next one. We're going to stay in the SEC. Who has more receiving yards for the Crimson Tide in their opener against Missouri? Devontae Smith, the senior receiver, or Jalen Waddle? Now, these guys were kind of split down the middle. I went and did a little bit of research for us and said, like, all right, who outdueled the other when it came to head-to-head last year? Smith outgained him in 1 or 2 extra games, if I remember correctly. It was pretty split, though. Smith, more of the Jerry Jeudy kind of crafty possession type. Waddle, more of that Henry Ruggs big play type. Who, in your mind, gets more yards in the opener?
I'm going to go with Jalen Waddle, and you can go either way. I think Devontae Smith is the more consistent performer. It does not surprise me that he outgained Waddle by a game or 2 last year, but I just feel like Waddle is absolutely electric with the ball in his hands. I mean, his play speed is ridiculous, and I bet you Alabama spent all this off time this offseason figuring out ways to get the ball to Jalen Waddle so he can create big plays in space. So I'm going to roll the dice kind of like a best ball. I'm going to say Jalen Waddle is the guy. By the way, how do you go from having Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs to then the next year having Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle still? I mean, we've never seen a team with receiving core like this.
I mean, how about having them all at the same time? Like, it's just like ridiculous. That's the thing with Jalen Waddle is like, yeah, even though Devontae Smith outgained him on a couple of games last year, Waddle was essentially like he was a role player for them. He was not a starter. Came on the field in certain packages, but Devontae Smith was a starter for that offense. I'm actually going to go Devontae Smith here, and I feel like we did something similar earlier this year, a couple weeks ago, with Daz Newsome and De'Ami Brown for UNC, and I ended up going with more of like the possession guy in Daz Newsome. That came back to bite me because we both actually lost that one. But I'm going to take Devontae Smith here, just because you look at his ability as a route runner. I think he's a really crafty player. I'm excited to see him with another year because I feel like this kid's got a skill set that works in the NFL. But he's a weird player, Ross, because like he's really smart. He's rail thin, so he's not like but he plays strong. So he plays bigger than his size. It sounds like he only times in like the 4.5s, like in the 40. He's not going to like test super well, but he plays faster than that. So you're talking about a player who plays bigger than he looks. He runs faster than he times. He's just a crafty player. He's just a gamer. I think Devontae Smith is an intriguing option. I don't know that he's going to be a quote unquote number 1 guy in the NFL, but I think he'll be a nice player for a long, long time. All right, let's go to the third one here. Baylor versus Kansas. All right, now this one got a little bit touchy. I almost had to change this last minute because Puka Williams, the star running back for the Jayhawks, in Les Miles terms, he got a little nicked up. So he's still. I mean, it sounds like he's going to be a go for this game. This is the opener for Baylor. What is the bigger number? Baylor's margin of victory or the total offensive touches by Puka Williams? Now, Puka Williams, when they lost to Coastal Carolina, earlier this year, Kansas, he had 12 touches in that game. When these two teams played last fall, he had 25 touches in the last game of the regular season last year. So you kind of get the realm of where we're at. He had 12 touches in the loss to Coastal Carolina, 25 last year. What is the bigger number? Puka's touches on offense, not including special teams, offensive touches, or the margin of victory in favor of Baylor?
Definitely margin of victory in favor of Baylor. And I felt this way before Puka Williams was a little bit banged up. He's going to get the rock a lot regardless. I know some people think he's the best running back in the Big 12, which says a lot. But this Baylor team is a lot better than the Coastal Carolina team that beat Kansas. And that was no fluke. Like Coastal Carolina, they beat Kansas fair and square. Now you got to deal with Baylor. And I know Matt Rule's not there anymore, but they still have some dudes at Baylor. I think Baylor rolls the Jayhawks by probably 20 to 30. And I'm not sure Puka Williams gets there, especially since they're going to be coming from behind the whole time.
I think it's going to be very tight. In terms, not that the game will be tight, but I think that this decision is going to be very, very tight because if Williams is a full go, I do feel like this is a guy that can get 20-plus touches. They want to try and get the ball into their best players' hands. They do creative things with him every single time he steps on the field, especially in the passing game. So, if they're playing from behind, would not shock me if they feature him out of the backfield, try and do some things with him vertically, because they definitely did that almost every single game I watched of them last year. But I just feel like, going off what you said, I mean, we've only seen Kansas one time. They lose to Coastal Carolina. It's tough to have a lot of faith that they'll be able to close the gap against Baylor, even though they lost a majority of the coaching staff. They lost some good players on defense. They lost their number one receiver in Mims. They've got some skill talent going back. Some of those receivers, a couple of the backs are returning. They've got some players. But, to me, this one could be a little bit closer than people think, but I'm still going to take the Baylor margin of victory. So, all right, so we're on the same side on two of these first three. Let's see how the last three go. Miami versus Florida State. What is the bigger number? Similar question here. Miami's margin of victory. We got to see Miami really blow the doors off Louisville. I mean, that game was never really close. Maybe at some point in the second quarter. But I was glad that for my sake in this game that he was able to come away, or they were able to come away with the victory. Or total catches combined for Brevin Jordan, the tight end from Miami, who got my game ball on the show here earlier this week, or Florida State wide receiver Tamarian Terry, the star receiver for the Seminoles. So you take the total catches from Brevin Jordan, you add them up to the total catches of Tamarian Terry. What is the bigger number? Those guys' total catches or the Hurricanes' margin of victory? Ross, give us your pick here.
I'm going to go margin of victory for the Hurricanes. I sold them short last week against Louisville. I said I thought Malik Cunningham and the Cardinals would get it done. They didn't. I thought Miami was overrated. They're absolutely not. De'Aaron King is electric. Those tight ends, both Brevin Jordan and Mallory, are studs. Watching Miami's defense fly around, even without, Rousseau, who opted out, Roche, as well as Jalen Phillips, who I remember from the Army Bowl.
Oh, yeah.
Total studs, man. I mean, they are good. I think Miami wins by double digits. I'm not sure Brevin Jordan and Terry get there in terms of catches.
Yeah, to me, it's tough, man, because this is such a rivalry. And Miami has kind of owned it over the last couple of years. I remember when this used to be one of my favorite games to watch every year, just because of the bragging rights involved and the stakes in the ACC. But it just hasn't been that way for the last couple of years. You throw in that Mike Norvell in his first year, they have the tough loss against Georgia Tech, which neither of us kind of predicted here in this segment. We both thought Florida State would come away with the win. He's out for this game. Mike Norvell's not going to travel because he tested positive for COVID-19. Obviously, best wishes to him and his health. Hopefully, he can get back on the sideline soon. To me, I just think that there's too much going in favor of Miami. So, as productive as I think Brevin Jordan and Tamarian Terry can be in this game, and I feel like they are going to feed Terry, I think he's going to be a very productive player for them this season. Mike Norvell in that scheme almost always has a lot of production for the quote-unquote number one receiver. I just feel like, that Miami is going to roll in this one. I'm also going to side with you here. I'm going to take Miami. Straight pick 'em. Auburn, Kentucky, our fifth game here. Auburn's got the linebacker Kenny Britt. Obviously, they lost a lot on that defensive front seven, but Kenny Britt comes back. Big Cat Bryant at defensive end, he is back. You've got some playmakers on offense. You've got the sophomore quarterback in Bo Nix, who kind of shocked a lot of people last year with a lot of firepower at the receiver position with Seth Williams and Anthony Schwartz. Kentucky's got some prospects, though, Ross. So all three levels of the defense, once again, they've got guys that are going to shock some people. And, and offensively, they've got that offensive line. They'll get into a slugfest. Straight pick them, though. Who do you like, Auburn or Kentucky?
I like Auburn. Kentucky's done a really nice job the last few years. They produced a lot of NFL defenders, Benny Snell. I mean, they deserve a lot of credit. They're no longer a laughingstock in the SEC at all. But I'm not going against Auburn. I mean, Auburn recruits at a higher level than Kentucky. They just do. They're still getting better players. I know Kentucky has prospects on all three levels of the defense, but Auburn always has dudes on the D-line. And I was really impressed by Bo Nix last year. Now he's back with the season under his belt. I will take Auburn to get it done in the SEC opener.
Dude, this is a tough one, man, because, dude, Kentucky has every year over the last couple of years, like, remember they went on the road and they beat Florida, in the swamp. They went and they beat Texas A&M. They've given a really good fight to some good teams over the last couple of years as well, even when they didn't come out with a victory. I think I'm going to have to agree with you, though. I think I'm going to play it safe on this one because Auburn, I agree. There's just too much firepower coming out in week one. I feel like, that's a team that usually comes out ready early. Usually their tough losses will come, in the third part of the season. To me, I'm going to look at Auburn as coming out and starting the season with a victory. So we've been on the same side here for a handful of these. Let's go for our last one. Over under 6.5 catches for Oklahoma State wide receiver Tylan Wallace, who Dane Brugler talked about earlier this week in our Draft Buzz segment. Had 4 catches last week, got the game ball for Dane. Over under 6.5 catches against West Virginia, Tylan Wallace, coming off the injury. What are your thoughts here?
I'm going to say over for Wallace because I think they're going to have to throw the rock to beat West Virginia. I don't think they're going to be able to run all over them. This isn't Tulsa. They're going to have to throw it. And I think Wallace would have to get 7 catches for them to win. He is the guy for Oklahoma State. So I'll go over.
So this one was an interesting one because, he had 4 catches last week, and that was his debut coming off the injury. But you go back to last year. How many times did he get over 6.5 catches? Only 4 times. He only did it 4 times last year. I'm actually going to take the under here. I'm going to say that in this game and West Virginia, look, they're in year 2 with that new coaching staff, and I know that the thought is that those guys are on the upswing. But I'm going to look at Oklahoma State. They've got injuries at quarterback. What's that going to look like here for this week? I'm actually going to take the under on Tylan Wallace. Not that he won't have an impact. But I'm going to say that in this game, maybe he ends up with like 5 for 70 and a touch, and I'll try and take the under here and see if I can sneak out a win. So, Ross, this was fun, man. We'll see who comes out on top. Thanks for joining us once again here on Pick 6. We'll talk to you next week on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
It always is, man. Let's do it.
Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the Journey to the Draft podcast here with Ross Tucker, Austin Ward, Ben Fennell. Great stuff from all those guys. Can't wait to see what we've got here this weekend in college football. Dane Brugler, Ben Fennell, and I will be back to break it all down early next week right here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.